Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight review and my fight analyzation of the very interesting fight card and the headliner, I believe, of UFC 307. At least I believe it was UFC 307. Between that of Mr. Alex Pereira and that of Khalil Rountree Jr. And this was a very interesting fight card. The only thing that I would say before we mainly talk about the main event is that, a lot of people, of course, they were talking about quote unquote bad judging or weird judging happening all night. I guess I can't really comment because really the only two fights that I really watched within full were the last two. Of course, the co-main event being, I believe, the 135-pound title between that of Juliana Pena versus that of Raquel Pennington. Now, personally, if you ask me, do I believe that Juliana Pena ended up winning the fight? Personally, I would have given it to Raquel Pennington. I thought that she won rounds 1, 4, and 5. But it is what it is. It was a very competitive fight. It was a very close fight, but I'd have to take a look at it. But I agreed with the announcers, and I also agreed that I thought that Raquel Pennington really should have taken that fight. But in terms of the main event, the reason why I wanted to talk about this, and some of you may be wondering, why am I talking about this? Because I very seldom do talk about the UFC or that of mixed martial arts, but mixed martial arts and the UFC especially, it's been a sport that I've been watching now for a very, very long time. Almost as long as I've been watching boxing, a little bit, probably less than boxing, but still right there with it. And I've grew up, of course, with a lot of great stories and a lot of great fighters within my time, whether it be John Jones or Daniel, DC Cormier, or that of Conor McGregor, Georges St. Pierre, or, that of other fighters. And Alex Pereira, of course, is one of those great stories to watch because when you take a look at his total mixed martial arts record and what he's been able to do against some of the level of competition, it really, of course, is a very special story. And for those of you that don't know, Alex Pereira, I believe, once upon a time was one of the top kickboxers in the world. Of course, still somewhat technically is. It's just that he doesn't really compete in kickboxing anymore. Of course, he competes in that of the full circle of mixed martial arts. But it's really been very, very impressive what he's been able to do because I believe that Alex Pereira, really only started getting full body into that of mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu and the full mixed martial arts game really only about a few years ago, or maybe about, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 years ago, max. He pretty much started getting into it, in the UFC, maybe about 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. Then of course he pretty much rose to the top in very, very infamous fashion. And for those of you, of course, that don't know his resume, the man has been able to knock out 5 championship level caliber fighters. Of course, his first fight against a fighter like that was against Sean Strickland, I believe, when he knocked him out a few years ago in the first round. Then, of course, after that, he got the title fight against that of an Israel Adesanya. That was a fight that he was actually losing, but but he ended up coming back and knocking out Israel Adesanya in the fifth round. By the way, Israel Adesanya has never been the same again after that fight. He's never mentally been the same again after that fight. Just in my personal view. Then, of course, after that, he won against Alex in the rematch. But after that, of course, he ended up losing to Sean Strickland and, of course, Dricus du Plessis, the South African fighter. But is what it is. And then, of course, after that, the man was able to beat Jan Blachowicz by split decision with his first fight at 205 at the light heavyweight class in the UFC. Then, of course, he was able to stop that of Jiri Prochazka in a very greatly awaited matchup. He was able to stop him again. And then, of course, before that, this year, he was able to stop that of Jamal Hill, the guy that was talking all that shit. But it is what it is. But, this fight I thought was going to be very particularly interesting. And a lot of people, of course, thought heading into this fight that this is going to be an easy fight in that Khalil Rountree Jr. Why Khalil Rountree Jr.? Because he's a guy that is a little bit inexperienced. He hasn't really beaten anybody to get to the title shot, but why him? And, to be honest with you, I do think that this probably was just a little bit of a stay busy fight for that of an Alex Pereira. It appears that the only other main challenger that really is worthy, in my view, of a potential title shot within that division is going to be that one Dagestani boy, I believe, Ankalaev. I believe his name is Magomed Ankalaev. That really is the only other fighter that I can even see possibly even challenging Pereira. Of course, you have Alexander Rakic, I believe, as well. That one Scandinavian fighter. But, of course, he recently lost to Jiri Prochazka by a TKO. So I really don't know if he's going to be able to do it, but we'll see what happens. And he fights Ankalaev next as well, so we'll see how that fight transitions. But anyways, for those of you, of course, that did not hear about the results, Khalil Rountree Jr., of course, ended up losing, I believe, by that of a fourth round brutal stoppage, by that of an Alex Pereira, which pretty much is what I expected. But for some of you that may be wondering at least a little bit about my knowledge of both of these fighters, was I expecting this fight to be competitive? Actually, yes, I was. And the reason why I thought that this fight was going to be competitive is because Alex Pereira is a fighter that is going to try to break you down incrementally with striking over time. He's mainly going to kickbox you. That's mainly what he's going to do. But he wants to really try to use his hands. He enjoys the knockout. He really loves to try to hunt you down and then knock you out. That's mainly what he wants to do. And I did think that there was going to be some problems for Alex within this fight, because when I took a look at Khalil Rountree Jr. and his striking, you can tell that he has actually very, very good boxing ability. And how do I know that? Because when he throws his strikes, his head comes off the center line. He's usually moving his head very decently well. He has a great right hook counter. They're very straight. They're not these wide looping punches that are very advertised. And when I took a look at Yuri Prochazka, for example, Yuri Prochazka, I don't know how much boxing ability that he has, but to be quite honest with you, it doesn't appear that he has much. Yuri Prochazka, even though he's a very dangerous fighter, his skill set is a little bit wild. He's a guy that keeps his hands down extremely low. He moves very awkwardly. A lot of his strikes are very wide and open and haymaker-ish when it comes down to it. So Alex Pereira, in my view, was always going to beat that of a Yuri Prochazka unless Yuri just hit him with the right punch, or unless he was able to intermix the grappling. That's why I always predicted Alex Pereira to beat him. Now, Jamal Hill, in terms of his hand striking at least, he's a little bit better, but he also is hittable, and it's not like he's invincible. And of course, Alex Pereira pretty much showed that within that of the first round, after that of this year. And I like Jamal Hill as a fighter. He's a decent fighter, but for the amount of shit that man was talking, and then ended up getting pretty much mollywopped against that of an Alex Pereira. Like, I don't want to hear anything from that dude, at least, not talking so much shit about, how he deserves a shot against Alex Pereira. Because at the end of the day, if we're really going to go there about Jamal Hill, even though he is a very good fighter, it's not like you were necessarily the complete kingpin of that division. You ended up getting the belt in that weight class because you ended up getting it because Yuri Prochazka was injured after he defeated Glover Teixeira, and then you fought Glover Teixeira after he pretty much was completely done because he got beat up by that of Yuri Prochazka in a very competitive fight in that fight. So, it is what it is. But the man was just talking way too much. way too much heading into that Alex Pereira fight. But once again, besides the point here, the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because Alex Pereira really, once again, is one of the greater stories that I've really seen in combat sports history. And this is a very interesting fight because Khalil Rountree Jr., in my view, had real boxing ability that oftentimes, at certain times, gives some MMA fighters some real problems when they don't see certain boxing ability like this before. And there's certain things that he was able to take advantage of within this fight against Alex Pereira, especially in terms of the boxing ability. One of the things that he's seen is that sometimes Alex Pereira, he keeps his hands down very, very low. And oftentimes he does not return his hands to his face in order to defend. He's gotten a little bit better at it, but he's still not an expert at it necessarily. He's not someone that is an exceptional defender of his face. Alex Pereira can get hit a little bit too often. His chin is oftentimes very high up in the air. His hands are very, very low, kind of similar to that of a Conor McGregor. Even though I would say Conor McGregor moved his head a decent amount better than what Alex Pereira did. But, when it comes down to, he still has a little bit of that problem. And I get it. The man, of course, is trying to be faster. And on top of that, he's trying to reach out his opponents. But one thing that Alex Pereira really should try to work on is defending a little bit better, is throwing, and especially inside the range, returning your hands straight to your face, because I promise you that is going to do great, great things. And Alex Pereira, sometimes he has a little bit of a problem of getting a little bit too overzealous sometimes with certain strikes, when it comes down to it, which is what happened to him in the Israel Adesanya rematch, a fight that he really should have won by stoppage, but because he went in there so recklessly with both of his hands down, and he thought that he had Israel dead to rights pretty much in that moment, which he almost did, but not quite enough. Israel Adesanya, of course, returned with a great counter punch, and of course, he was able to stop him. So, Alex Pereira, you could tell within this fight, even though there was still a little bit of that, he definitely learned, and he wasn't just going in there balls to the wall in order to possibly get knocked out by another shot. So I give Alex Pereira that credit. He definitely fought smarter and more intelligent within this fight. But there was certain things that Khalil Rountree Jr., especially in terms of the boxing ability, was able to do better than Alex Pereira. He was the better counterpuncher in certain times. Also, another thing that Alex Pereira should do, and if you're just asking me personally, in my view, Alex Pereira, as well as a lot of these MMA fighters, they would benefit a lot if they trained a little bit with some of these professional boxers, or at least trained with MMA fighters that really know how to have some actual boxing ability, or go against some, fighters, or train with certain fighters that actually have great boxing ability, like that of an Aaliyah Taporia or a Dustin Poirier, or something like that, because those guys have excellent, excellent boxing ability for an MMA fighter. And one of the things that you see about them is that their head is usually always moving off the center line when they throw. At least that's one of the things overall that, is mainly what a boxer is pretty much taught to do. If you're doing the basics right, you always have to try to move your head off the center line. And Alex was getting hit with a certain amount of right hooks in this fight because he would throw the jab and he would stay within range. And on top of that, he was not returning his hands to his face. But of course, he was starting to adjust to that a little bit. He was starting to back up and shoulder roll to a certain degree. But, you can tell that Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya also had this same issue. You can tell that those two fighters, that they definitely realize when they usually have the reach and the height to their ability. And Alex is a little bit lucky in this fight that Khalil Rountree, for example, was not a little bit lengthier or a little bit taller, because this could have been a little bit more of an interesting fight had Khalil Rountree not had to lunge in there at certain times overall with some of his strikes. And that's also another thing that Alex Pereira, in my view, would benefit from learning, as well as also a lot of these MMA fighters don't completely back up in a complete linear or straight line when your opponent is coming straight at you. What you're supposed to do is that at times you're supposed to have lateral movement, where you're able to move from side to side and you're able to move around a little bit in a circle, at least to a certain degree, because that will make sure that you get out of the range of your opponent. You can back up, of course, a few steps in a linear line, but then you're supposed to move in a little bit of a circle or have lateral movement after that. Alex Pereira does have a little bit of the MMA striker problem of backing up a little bit too much in a linear line, and that can be a little bit of a problem. But Alex Pereira obviously is a great fighter. It's just that he's not a flawless fighter. He is someone that, if I were to take a look at him at the heavyweight division against that of a John Jones or a Tom Aspinall, I'm not quite sure if I would favor him over either of those fighters, but I would give him a chance. I would give him at least, a 40 to 30% chance, because Alex Pereira is an extremely skilled fighter, especially as a kickboxer, and that is mainly what saved him within this fight. Because Khalil Rountree Jr., in my view, he had Alex Pereira at least beat in certain boxing ability, but Alex Pereira, of course, was also using knees, he was using kicks, he was using low kicks when it came down to it, and that pretty much is what ended up winning him the fight. Alex Pereira, in my view, for those of you that don't remember this fighter, but a lot of you that are UFC fans or MMA fans, of course, you'll know who I'm talking about. For those of you that remember Chuck the Iceman Liddell, that's who Alex Pereira reminds me of. He reminds me of a more technical version of that of a Chuck the Iceman Liddell. And Chuck the Iceman Liddell was not necessarily someone that was just not technical. It's just that for the time that, he looks a little bit sloppier, compared to today's standards, because Chuck Liddell was kind of in the era to where they were kind of just beginning. And Chuck Liddell overall, he beat a lot of great fighters of his era. He was able to beat, I believe, that one Brazilian champion, Sebastian, whatever his name was, Mona something. I can't remember, the great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist, the great grappler, who is a former champion. He was, of course, able to beat Vitor Belfort. He was able to beat Tito Ortiz. He was able to beat Alistair Overeem. I believe in Pride, he was able to beat that of Randy Couture. He was able to beat Tito Ortiz. He was able to beat, I believe, even some other fighters that personally at the moment that I'm not mentioning or that maybe I forgot about. Of course, he also beat that of Kevin Randleman, who was the former champion, I believe. Great wrestler and a relatively good striker. That's who Alex Pereira reminds me of. He's someone that isn't completely flawless. He doesn't move his head off the center line extremely well, at least at certain times. He's a guy that gets hit a little bit too often, for his own good. But because of his all-around great skill set, especially as a kickboxer, he's technical enough and he's skilled enough and great enough to where he can get away with that. And on top of that, because of his complete athletic gifts in terms of his height and reach, and on top of that, just because of his pure power, he can get away with a lot of that stuff. But I do give Alex Pereira credit once again. I thought that he was countering very decently well, but it was very obvious that he was looking for that right hand throughout the majority of the fight. He was trying to get that, right hand in there throughout the whole entire time of the third round. He was trying to get Khalil Rountree to overextend with that left hand, overall, so he could duck to the right and then come over the top of the right hand, which, of course, he was eventually able to do because Khalil Rountree, of course, just tired out eventually, which probably had to do a little bit with moving around, and also Alex Pereira's kicks and a certain amount of other things, and of course just the level of power and size that man brings to the table. Alex Pereira is just a phenomenally dangerous fighter. The man is just absolutely a powerhouse. But anyways, when it comes down to it, I thought that Khalil Rountree Jr., in terms of winning the fight, I thought that, he actually won the first two rounds. So the third one, I think I gave to Alex by a smidge because he started doing some major damage. And then, of course, the fourth round was just a complete obliteration. And you take a look at the man's face there. The man's face is just all busted up. Take a look at him in the fight aftermath. Man looked like he got attacked by a pit bull in there. I don't know what the fuck, happened. I mean, I do. Alex, of course, just beat the shit out of him in round 4. But by that time, he was just getting way too tired. He was throwing sloppy and, tired mid-range shots, which Alex, of course, was able to duck under and change levels eventually and counter over the top. And if you're going to beat Alex Pereira, you need to be consistent. You need to have great conditioning, and on top of that, you need to, like I said, be consistent, and you cannot throw these lazy jabs out there. You cannot throw these lazy shots because Alex Pereira is a guy that will counter over the top with those shots, especially with his height and reach. Now, that being stated, what I will state is this: Alex Pereira, and I'm going to state two things about him. First of all, if he is not the number one pound for pound fighter, then he's at the very least number 2, in my personal view. Now, of course, some people may say, well, who would potentially be number 1 if it's not Alex Pereira? It could be Islam Makhachev, of course, that one Dagestani fighter. He is a great fighter. He's beaten Dustin Poirier. He's beaten that of Charles Oliveira. He's also beaten that of Alexander Volkanovski on 2 separate occasions. Yes, Alexander Volkanovski was coming up in weight, but it is what it is. Alexander Volkanovski is also one of the all-time great MMA fighters ever, and then, of course, you have John Jones, but I just can't have him at the number 1 pound per pound spot anymore because, I mean, the man has only fought once in, the past 4 years? It is what it is. And it's no offense against John Jones, but it's very obvious that he doesn't really want any potential smoke overall with either that of a Francis Ngannou when he was around. A lot of people overall, they said that Francis Ngannou was avoiding John Jones. That's actually not the case of the matter. John Jones basically took a 2-year hiatus in order for Francis Ngannou to get the fuck out of that heavyweight division. That's pretty much what he did for a lot of people that don't remember. And right now, Tom Aspinall, of course, he looks like a mega threat. I'm not going to claim that John Jones is completely ducking Tom Aspinall at the moment, but just in my personal view, it's looking like John Jones does not really want a whole lot of smoke with that of a Tom Aspinall. I hope that I'm wrong after the Stipe Miocic fight, but John Jones versus that of Tom Aspinall is the fight that pretty much everybody wants to see. But we'll see, because John Jones, he is getting up there in age. We'll see what ends up happening with that. But as for Alex Pereira, when it comes down to it, I would believe that he's either number 1 or number 2 pound for pound right now. He's certainly within the top 3, at least personally in my view. And when you talk about it overall, once again, now, is he a completely flawless fighter in my view? No, but he's very similar to Chuck Liddell. Someone that at one point in time, no, not completely flawless, or maybe not as skilled as, say, what a Anderson Silva was at his peak, or a Georges St. Pierre was at his peak, when it comes down to it, or a John Jones at their absolute peak, but someone that was extremely dangerous, someone that was extremely skilled, and someone that, could potentially have been, at one point in time, the number 1 pound for pound fighter throughout the whole entire sport, or at least throughout that of the UFC's roster. Alex Pereira, once again, is very skilled. Now, some of the faults that he does have, I do think, would be very, very much helped if he went to that of a boxing trainer or a boxing coach. Once again, some of the faults that he does have: he keeps his hands down very, very low. He keeps his chin very, very high up in the air. I think that he could defend a little bit better. I think that he could have better lateral movement. He backs up a little bit too much in a linear line, and he just needs to change his level a little bit more, I think, when he throws certain strikes. If he was able to do that, in my personal view, he would become even more dangerous and very potentially beat both Tom Aspinall and that of a John Jones. Because could you imagine if Alex Pereira had that level of ability to change his levels and, move laterally very well? And, on top of that, in my view, he could potentially knock both of those fighters out. Alex Pereira is an extremely great fighter. I just think that, that he could improve a little bit, especially within that of the boxing category. you know. And of course, there's the grappling, but Alex Pereira isn't really looking to grapple with you anyway. Of course, he has great takedown defense, which also was a great category of Mr. Chuck the Iceman Liddell. But those two fighters, once again, the reason why I compare them is because, those guys, they kind of had similar strengths and also similar faults, but also at the end of the day, they also kind of had similar styles. They were looking to pretty much beat you up. They were looking to pretty much maul you. That's what they were looking to do. They were looking to make the fight entertaining. They wanted to go for the kill. They wanted to get the stoppage. They wanted to get the knockout. Those guys were monsters. That's what Alex Pereira and Chuck Liddell are. That's what those guys are. And they can fight someone in a multitude of ways. Are they as technical as someone, once again, like an Anderson Silva or a John Jones, or, quite as skilled as those guys? Maybe not, but, it's not too far away enough. And on top of that, because of their athletic gifts, that they're just able to do it, to a degree to where at one point in time, they could be the best fighter in the world. And right now, Alex Pereira is the best fighter in the world. Now, where does he go next from here? In my personal view, I think that the next fight that everybody should want to see, or the next fight that a lot of people should be looking for, is the winner of the Magomed Ankalaev versus Alexander Rakic fight. Whoever is the winner of that fight, which I do assume more than likely is going to be Ankalaev, or Ankalaev, however you pronounce his name. I believe it's Ankalaev. I believe that that's the fight that everybody wants to see. And it'd be very interesting because Ankalaev is a relatively good striker, but of course the Dagestani fighters, we all know mainly what they're going to do in times of adversity. They're mainly usually going to pull out that wrestling, and it would be very particularly interesting to see if Alex would be able to handle a certain fighter like that. But of course, if he's able to handle, Mr. Magomedov, or Ankalaev, excuse me, after that, of course, the move would potentially be to fight that either of Adrikas Duplessis at 185, which, is a relatively good fight, but not the fight that I would really personally want to see. I would like to see Alex Pereira potentially try to fight the UFC champion at the heavyweight division. But I would also like to see him potentially, once again, sharpen up on some of the faults that he has shown a little bit, at least in terms of some of his ability. And he's a great fighter. He's a great technical fighter in certain areas, and that's a big part of the reason why he won this fight once again. Khalil was showing better boxing ability in certain spots than Alex Pereira, but Alex Pereira was the better all-around fighter in terms of MMA. He was the better kickboxer. He was using his kicks. He was using more angles of attack, whereas Khalil Rountree was mainly only using his hand striking. And that, in my view, personally was a mistake. And even Joe Rogan stated that he needed to use more kicks in order to potentially win that fight. And unfortunately for him, it just did not happen. He was not able to do it. And of course, it's very difficult because Alex Pereira is a guy that's very lengthy, very tall, and the man hits like a semi-truck. So it is what it is. But, unfortunately for him, he was going to have to do that in order to win the fight. He just did not do enough of it. And his boxing ability, he was only going to win completely off of that if he was going to be able to knock out Alex Pereira with one punch. And Alex Pereira clearly had smart enough from the Israel Adesanya fight to where that also was not going to happen. And his jab was excellent. He had enough boxing ability as well to where, and enough height and reach also to where he was able to outbox that of a Khalil Rountree in certain spots because of his jab, then back up and of course eventually get him with that right hand that he was looking for. But also another thing that I got to say about Alex and Israel Adesanya, they do this as well. You can tell that they rely a little bit too much on that height and reach. And one of the signs that you can see of this is that when a fighter backs up, when they're getting attacked, their hands are still down very, very low. Or they overreach with certain parries, or they overreach overall with certain lead hands, or hands away from their face, and they're not keeping their hands up particularly well. Even John Jones to a certain degree does this to where you can take a look in the DC Daniel Cormier rematch. He's pulling his hands away from his face, and Daniel Cormier is able to go over the top in the range of certain hooks or uppercuts, when it comes down to it, and he's able to get John Jones with some of those strikes. That's a fault that a lot of taller fighters that are usually used to being taller and lengthier than their opponents, that they usually make, because they're usually used to the defensive maneuver of just sticking their lead hand in that particular fighter's face, in order to pretty much keep them away for distance management. So hopefully Alex Pereira maybe can improve on that a little bit as well. Israel Adesanya also had that similar problem, which is why against Alex Pereira in the first fight, he pulled both hands away from his face, and Alex Pereira was able to get that left hook in there, and it pretty much was all she wrote from there. You need to keep your hands up, in good certain defensive spaces. That is something that, in my view, that Alex Pereira could work on. But as for the heavyweight division, I would love to see him fight John Jones or Tom Aspinall. I don't think that I would favor him necessarily against either one of those fighters, but it certainly would be a very interesting watch. I just hope to see that Alex Pereira potentially could maybe improve on some of those things. But he definitely is one of the greatest fighters of all time. He's certainly one of the top 20, top 30 greatest UFC fighters that I've personally ever seen of all time. In my view, he's up there with some of the all-time greats. The man is a two-weight division champion. He's knocked out 5 championship caliber fighters within his career. Very decently technically sound kickboxer. Of course, not faultless, but someone that is very technically sound and someone that is debatably the number one pound for pound fighter. So Alex Pereira definitely deserves a lot of credit. He's certainly a very interesting fighter to watch. So I just thought that I would comment on that. Another thing that I also would state is that what he can learn from boxing ability is that to learn to throw combinations. Daniel Cormier also stated this as well. Alex Pereira is a pretty much a one shot at a time type of guy, one or two. And in my view, it would certainly help if the man threw a little bit more of combinations. That way, there's more potential openings or you keep your opponents guessing, and it's just not one shot coming at a time. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I just thought that I would talk about that, talk about some of the things that I've seen that I thought that Alex Pereira as a fighter could improve on, and some of the things that he does exceptionally well. He is a great manager of distance. He has an excellent jab. He has that excellent low kick and those excellent, leg kicks to begin with. He has a great front kick to the body, which is a lot like that of the stabbing jab to the body in boxing. You can have either the jab or the front kick to the body in a mixed martial arts fight, and both of those will open up other things, other attacks, for you. So he has that down, certainly. Alex Pereira is just a great all-around fighter. Great all-around fighter. Certainly could improve in certain areas, but someone that for the amount of time that he's been in the all-around mixed martial arts game and the level of competition that he's been able to beat, phenomenal fighter, phenomenal story. Very, very entertaining watch, always to watch him fight. Not only because of the story, but because of what he brings to the table in terms of the skill set, and especially as a kickboxer. Alex Pereira is a phenomenal, one of the greatest kickboxing fighters, to turn mixed martial artist ever. He's up there with anybody. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. I would be very excited to see the Magomed Ankalaev fight next with that of an Alex Pereira, assuming that Ankalaev is able to beat that of Alexander Rakic. But we'll see what ends up happening. But that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.